The desert has no mercy and less memory. Yet sometimes, when the wind moves just so, the dunes shift and the sands whisper, not in words, not in a tongue we would know, but in a low, bone-dry sigh, a sound like the last breath of a dying man. It is in this wind, this sighing, that the legend of the vanished army lives. They say it began in the reign of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. The year was 525 BC, when the empire's banners unfurled like fire across the known world, and the deserts of Egypt lay restless under Persian command. Far to the west, in the oasis city of Siwa, stood the oracle of Ammon, a shrine set like a jewel in the scorched horizon, where the god himself was said to speak. Cambyses, his heart heavy with conquest and suspicion, heard whispers that the priests of Ammon had insulted him, doubting his claim as pharaoh of Egypt. Rage, in those days, was reason enough for war. He sent forth 50,000 men, spearmen, archers, camel riders, slaves carrying supplies, an army vast enough to crush kingdoms, to erase villages from the maps of men. They marched out from Thebes and into the Libyan desert, sun-striking helmets, heat shimmering around them in liquid waves. The desert was no place for a mortal host, but the Persians were fearless, and the god-king's word was iron. For 7 days they crossed the sands, reaching the great oasis of Karga. There they drank deep, rested in the shade of date palms, and pressed on toward Siwa. The wind stiffened. The sky deepened into a blinding brass glare. The air itself began to move, not as wind moves, but as though the world had inhaled and would never exhale again. Some say it came at dawn, others claim it was midday, the moment when the horizon rose and moved toward them. Not a wall of stone, not an army of men, but an avalanche of sand. It came with a sound like a drum without skin, rolling in great hollow booms. The soldiers cried out. Some dropped their shields, running blindly into nothing. Camels screamed. The sand was upon them before orders could be given. It filled mouths, ears, the spaces beneath armor. It pressed into eyes until vision was only pain. The air turned solid. Breathing became drowning. Men clutched each other and vanished. The wind stripped the earth bare. No one came back, not a scout, not a slave. The army had ceased to exist. When news reached Cambyses, he raged at the priests, again blaming magic, betrayal, divine wrath. But the desert swallowed the truth. The oracle of Ammon remained silent, its god smiling through the incense smoke. And the Persians learned that some battles are fought not with swords, but with the patience of a land older than kings. Centuries passed. Herodotus, the great historian, recorded the tale as it was told to him. 50,000 souls devoured by the sands. Many doubted him, calling it myth. Others, hearing the story in the firelit tents of traders, swore it was true. Expeditions came and went. In the 20th century, a man named Elesiel Almasi, desert explorer, mapmaker, seeker of lost things, ventured into the Libyan wasteland, following the faded line of the army's supposed path. He found strange ruins, stone walls half buried, fragments of statues shaped like lions or sphinxes, but carved from limestone not native to the desert. He found bones, too human, yes, but old beyond measure, older than Cambyses' war. The desert gives no easy answers, even with the eyes of satellites and the probing of ground-penetrating radar. The search has yielded only silence, a scattering of tumuli weathered to anonymity. A shard of bronze here, a carved bead there. Enough to suggest the passage of people, never enough to prove the army's grave. Perhaps the sands shift each century, lifting the bones, scattering them farther from the truth. Perhaps the army lies in a chamber beneath stone, sealed away by the same storm that buried them. Or perhaps the desert took not just their bodies, but their place in the world entirely, erasing them as though they had never drawn breath at night. The desert is a sea of ink, stars burning cold above its surface. Somewhere under that darkness, if you believe the old tale, 50,000 soldiers sleep. Their shields are filled with dust. Their spears point nowhere. Their eyes, if eyes remain, stare into the eternity of sand. And still the wind moves, soft, as a mourner's hand over the skin of the dunes. If you walk far enough, and if the moon is hidden, you may hear it, that low, hollow sigh. It is the desert remembering them. Or perhaps it is only the desert breathing, waiting for the next army foolish enough to challenge its silence. They say the forest keeps its own dead. It buries them not in graves of stone, but beneath roots and shadow, under a canopy so dense that even the sun must ask permission to enter. And yet, from above, when the clouds part and the jungle breathes in the light of morning, shapes stir in the green. Circles too perfect to be chance, lines too straight for the language of trees, rectangles, avenues, the long bones of a city that has been gone for centuries. Far below this vast and living roof, the air is heavy with moisture and age. The Amazon hums with life, insects weaving their constant metallic chorus, unseen creatures pacing in the underbrush, water moving, somewhere out of sight. Here, in the upper reaches of the basin, the earth is red and rich, yet it holds its secrets with the patience of a god. In the centuries before the Europeans came, before their steel and sickness bled across the land, a people walked here. They left no marble temples, no bronze colossi to command the ages. Instead, they spoke to the future in earth and shape. Between the years we now call 21283, they carved their presence into the ground with geometric precision. Massive circles, each the length of several hundred paces, rectangles aligned to the passage of the sun, ditches and embankments etched into the soil so deeply that even centuries of rain could not smooth them away. Roads, wide and straight, ran like veins between them, linking one shape to the next, a network as deliberate as the constellations. Tens of thousands may have lived along these lines, not in cities as we imagine them, but in settlements woven between the forest and the river, fed by the rhythm of floods and the shifting seasons. And then, one day, the forest began to take them back. It was not war, not a single moment of fire and screams. It was slower, more intimate. Trees returned to the abandoned roads, roots split the walls of their ditches. The green tide rose year by year until no human eye could see the patterns from the ground. From within the jungle, it must have seemed as though the cities had been erased entirely, their memories swallowed by vines and rain. For centuries, the only witnesses were the birds that flew above, tracing invisible paths between what had been. Even the tribes who came later, moving through the forest in small bands, told no stories of the people who had lived in these great shapes. The silence grew until it became the truth. It was the sky that betrayed them. When the modern world's gaze turned upward, and then downward from the flight of airplanes and the sweep of satellites, the ghosts of these cities stirred again. From above, the forest no longer looked like an endless, formless sea. The patterns reappeared, as if the earth itself had been keeping them safe until someone learned to look from a god's perspective. The first pilots to glimpse them spoke of strange shadows beneath the canopy, of straight lines and sharp corners, where no such thing should be. Later, images gathered by machines confirmed what the human eye had suspected. These were not the random scars of nature, but the deliberate script of a vanished hand. Archaeologists came. They hacked paths through the jungle heat, sweating under the weight of their tools, following coordinates given not by local guides, but by the eyes in the sky. They stood in clearings where the forest had been cut away, staring at the great rings and lines that rose from the soil. They touched the embankments, the layered earth still firm underfoot. Some whispered of cities, others called them ceremonial. Grounds all agreed. This was no work of accident, but the builders themselves remain silent. No written language survives. No statues bear their faces. No graves have yielded the treasures or tools that might name them. Even the cause of their disappearance is lost. Were they undone by drought, by the slow failure of the land? Did disease come with the river traders long before the sails of Europe appeared on the horizon? Or did they simply move on, abandoning their shapes to the mercy of the green? At dusk, when the forest exhales its cool breath and the first bats stir, it is easy to imagine them still here. Children running the wide roads, elders standing in the circle's center, faces painted for a ceremony whose meaning we will never know. Fires burning low in the humid dark, their smoke curling upward through the canopy toward the stars, the same stars that now watch their earthworks from above. And so the cities remain, not on our maps, but suspended between past and present, visible only when the forest's veil is lifted by height and distance. To walk among them is to be blind. To see them is to be far away. Some believe the shapes are messages, their precision too perfect for mere boundaries or games. But to whom were they written? To the gods of river and rain, to future eyes that would one day pierce the canopy, or to themselves, a way to mark their brief moment upon the earth before the leaves closed over them. The forest does not answer. It grows on, tireless and without memory. Yet from time to time, when the clouds break and the jungle lies spread beneath the gaze of something higher, the silent cities of the Amazon return for a moment, long as it takes the light to change. Then the green swallows them again, and the mystery breathes back into the earth. It is in this rhythm, revealing, concealing, that the truth of them now exists. Not in the permanence of stone, but in the fleeting grace of a glimpse, a whisper, a shadow seen from far above. And perhaps that is how they wanted it, to be remembered not in the clutter of detail, but in the simple, haunting geometry that even the forest cannot quite erase. The sea remembers in whispers, not the gentle sigh of waves upon the shore, but a low, eternal murmur, as if speaking to itself in a language no living ear can understand. Somewhere in that voice, beneath centuries of tides, lies the memory of a city, Thonis to the Egyptians, Heraclean to the Greeks, that once stood at the water's edge, a gate between the Nile's slow pulse and the restless, salted breath of the Mediterranean. They say the city was a liminal place, neither fully of the land nor wholly of the sea. Ships from distant isles arrived heavy with amphorae, spices, and strange tongues, their sails blotting out the horizon before lowering into the embrace of the harbour. Here, the laws of the pharaoh met the ambitions of Greek merchants. Here, priests of Osiris carried sacred barks through temple courts, while bronze-helmed soldiers watched from the wharves. Marble statues stood sentinel in the salt air, their faces serene, as though they knew both the weight of empire and the inevitability of change. But the ground beneath Thanos Heracleion was not as steadfast as its temples. The Nile's waters whispered secrets into the soil, softening it, loosening its grip. The sea waited, patient as only the sea can be. And one day, perhaps in a season of trembling earth, or when the sea rose in a single, furious breath, the waiting ended. Some tell of earthquakes that rippled beneath the city's foundations, the stone shuddering as if struck by an invisible hammer. Others speak of liquefaction, the earth itself turning briefly to water, swallowing columns, courtyards, and homes in an instant. There are those who whisper of a great wave, a wall of water that struck with the force of gods, sweeping away what it did not drag under. Whatever the truth, the end came not as a slow decay but as a moment of terror and surrender. The harbor was pulled into the deep. Temples sank in silence. Marble gods disappeared beneath curtains of silt. The city that had bridged to worlds was claimed by a third, a world of perpetual twilight, where currents are the wind, and light arrives only in ripples from above, centuries past. Sand and silt wrapped the ruins in a soft burial shroud. Fish swam where merchants once haggled. Corals grew in the hollows of broken statues. The city's name was carried only in faded manuscripts, half remembered by scholars, doubted by some, until even doubt itself seemed pointless. Then, one day in the late years of the 20th century, a shadow stirred on the seabed, far from any shore. Divers descended through a haze of drifting sand, their lights carving pale beams through the green gloom. And there it was, a colossal statue of a pharaoh, lying on its side, as if gently put to rest, its lips still curved in the faintest smile. Nearby, the body of a god Hopi, lord of the Nile's flood, rose from the mud, his massive form as intact as the day he was set in place. The divers walked among avenues no foot had touched in more than a millennium. Temples lay as though asleep, their pillars still upright, their hieroglyphs sharp beneath layers of sea life. A gold coin rested in the curve of a shell. A ceremonial bark, once carried in processions for Osiris, lay preserved in the silt. They found altars, inscribed decrees, the tools of priests, the trappings of merchants, all of it frozen in the strange stillness of the deep. Yet, for all its preserved beauty, the city would not explain itself. No inscription recorded the day of its fall. No fragment of papyrus spoke of the last sunrise over its harbor. In the quiet of the seabed, there is only suggestion, a wall leaning as if pushed by a wave, rubble lying in a direction that hints at sudden collapse. Sediment, packed as if by violent waters. Those who study it now speak in possibilities. Earthquake, tsunami, soil that betrayed its own weight. But the sea, if it knows, does not tell. It has kept the city for itself, holding its treasures in a cold, shifting embrace. When the divers ascend and leave it behind, Thanos Heracleion returns to its otherworldly sleep. Sunlight refracts above, casting trembling light on the faces of the stone gods. Eels drift through the doorways of what were once bustling markets. The silt settles again, erasing the disturbance of human touch. There is a kind of mercy in this, that a city born of water, living at the meeting of river and sea, should return to them in the end. Above, the Nile still runs to the Mediterranean. Ships still cut across its waters. But down below, in that hushed and weightless world, the drowned city waits. Its silence is not emptiness, but the fullness of a story too deep for words. A story only the sea remembers, and the sea, as always, is in no hurry to speak. Beneath the slow breath of the Indus River, where the water turns the color of wet clay and moves with the patience of centuries, there are shadows no sun can reach. They are not the shadows of trees or clouds, but of cities entire, cities that once rose like brick-red constellations against the pale floodplains, only to vanish into the very soil that had sustained them. Long ago, before the gods of Egypt were carved in stone, and before the walls of Babylon rose from the desert, there was Harappa, there was Mohenjo-daro, places whose names we speak now as if they were charms, syllables drawn from dust and dreams. They were cities of order, of symmetry, of a strange and measured beauty. Streets ran straight, as if pulled taut by an unseen string, wide enough for carts and shaded by overhanging balconies. Houses, made from uniform-baked bricks, stood in quiet rows, their courtyards open to the sky. Drains ran neatly beneath the ground, carrying away what should not remain. In the heart of Mohenjo-daro was a great bath, its steps descending into water that shimmered in the light, fed by wells, and sealed by bitumen. Perhaps here the priests washed away the burdens of their people. Perhaps lovers came in the dark to whisper secrets in the steam. And in the workshops, artisans pressed intricate seals from soft clay square tokens no larger than a palm, marked with animals in a script that curls and cuts in ways we still cannot read. A unicorn, a bull, a tiger, lines of symbols that may have been names, prayers, or debts. The clay has survived. The meaning has not. No king's face watches from these ruins. No warlord's name lingers in the air. The Indus cities kept their power faceless, or hid it well. Here there were no pyramids to speak for the dead, no colossal statues to defy the centuries. Just brick, water, seal, and silence. And then, somewhere between the years 1900 and 1300 before Christ, the silence deepened, the cities emptied, their baths stood still, kilns cooled, the streets filled, not with people, but with the slow creep of wind-blown silt. The reasons are many, yet none suffice. Some say the river betrayed them, shifting its course and leaving the fields to thirst under a pitiless sun. Others speak of tectonic tremors that shivered the land, breaking the flow of canals and wells. There are whispers of distant enemies arriving with strange tongues and sharper weapons. Though the ruins show no scars of conquest, no burned walls, no litter of arrows, perhaps it was quieter than that, a slow decline felt in the thin harvests. The empty granaries, the caravans that stopped coming. One year a family leaves, another year a street stands deserted. In time, the sound of the city fades to the wind alone. The Indus keeps their secret. When the modern world found them again, the earth had wrapped them in its slow embrace. Villagers stood atop the buried streets, their walls made from bricks stolen from walls far older. Beneath, the ancient grid still lay, almost untouched. Excavators brushed away the layers of centuries and found doorways that had not opened in 3,000 years. Staircases worn smooth by forgotten feet, wells that still held water, and always those seals, pulled from the mud in handfuls each, marked with that same delicate, inhuman script, the writing of a people who spoke to one another in a language that left no sound for us to follow. We can read the laws of Hammurabi, the hymns of the pharaohs, the accounts of Sumerian scribes. But the Harappans, though they built cities as enduring as the sun's paths, spoke to us in a code that time has locked and will not give back. At Mohenjo-daro, the bones of its last inhabitants tell little. A few skeletons lie where they fell, untouched by blades or fire. No mass graves, no lines of bodies at the gates, The city did not go out in screams, but in the softer sound of absence. Yet the river has a memory longer than ours. The Indus flows past the ruins still, its waters curling like a serpent around the edges of the ancient floodplains. In the monsoon, the fields fill, and for a moment the land feels alive again, as if it remembers the weight of thousands of footsteps, the smell of fires in the evening air, the glow of lamps behind clay walls. It is strange to stand there now, with the heat pressing down and the wind carrying only the rustle of dry grass, and imagine the sound of voices speaking a language no living mouth can form. To think of children running through the alleys, traders calling their prices, the slap of wet clay as seals were pressed and lifted. All of it gone, and yet, in some hidden way, still here woven into the very dust beneath your feet. Time does not bury everything. Some things it preserves in shadows. In the river's mud, under layers of silt and centuries, the Harappan cities wait. Their bricks are warm under the sun, their seals cool in the hand, their script still curling and cutting toward meaning. But they will not tell you their rulers' names. They will not say why they left. They will not give you the word, for home or for God or for grief. They have chosen, it seems, to remain their own guardians, to let their story be a sigh that never fully escapes the lips. And perhaps that is the truest measure of a civilization's power, not what it shouts into the centuries, but what it carries into silence, knowing the silence will keep it whole. They say the dead slept beneath their feet, not in tombs beyond the horizon, not in lonely fields where the wind keens over stones, but here in the cool packed earth under the hearth, under the place where bread was baked, under the woven mats where children played. At night, when the lamps guttered and shadows trembled along the walls, the living lay down above the bones of their own, the breath of sleep rising into air thick with the memory of generations. This was Kaital Yak, a city without streets. Around 7,500 years before the birth of Christ, it rose in the fertile belly of Anatolia, a dense hive of clay and timber, homes pressed tight as clasped hands, their walls leaning into each other for strength. There were no doorways on the ground, no paths cut between the buildings. Instead, the people moved across the world's first great rooftop labyrinth, a skin of flat clay roofs stretching to the edges of sight. Ladders plunged down through ceiling holes into the warmth below. The city was a honeycomb turned inside. Out, each cell alive, each roof a road, each floor a tomb. Inside, the walls glowed with color. Ochre and charcoal swirled into murals, herds of wild aurochs in furious stampede, vultures stretching their wings over headless men, women dancing in circles, breasts full and arms lifted to the sun. The smell of smoke clung to everything, sweet and sharp. Baskets of grain leaned against the walls. Obsidian blades, black and bright as ice, waded on reed mats. Beneath the floors, the dead lay folded, their knees drawn to their chests, their arms tucked in, their skulls cradled in the crook of their ribs. Some had been buried whole, but others had been disturbed long after the first burial. Their skulls removed, painted in deep red ochre, and returned to the living. These skulls were sometimes kept in the home, smoothed by hands, set into altars, or buried again in a different place. Perhaps they were revered ancestors, guardians, voices that still murmured in dreams. Perhaps they were trophies of some older grief. Day after day, the living stepped across these graves, the weight of their bodies pressed into the packed floors, their heels drumming the soft whisper of bone into the silence below. It was not seen as morbid, It was the order of things. The dead were not gone. They were folded into the rhythm of the hearth, woven into the fabric of daily life. From the rooftops, the view was endless. The horizon rolled in a quilt of grassland and river, the light pooling gold in the mornings, burning white at noon and sinking into copper dusk. Beyond, the walls of the city, the wild weighted deer flickering through tall grass, the low thunder of cattle, vultures coasting on the warm breath of thermals. Inside, the sound was muffled, a constant hum of small movements, the grind of stone on grain, the hiss of fire, the tread of bare feet on clay. For more than 4 centuries, this city endured. Children were born, played on the roofs, climbed. The ladders grew into hunters, mothers, artisans. The dead beneath them multiplied. Layers of floors rose over layers of bones, the city building itself upward, even as it buried its past, and then, slowly, it emptied. No war broke through the walls. No flood drowned the alleys. There is no record of fire or famine, yet the smoke-thick rooms grew quiet. The rooftops saw fewer footsteps. One by one, the homes were sealed, their ladder holes closed, their doors to the sky bricked over. Families left with their tools and baskets, and the wind began to walk the roofs alone. We do not know where they went, or why. Perhaps the land soured, the soil weary from centuries of planting. Perhaps trade paths shifted, drawing the young away toward other fires. Or perhaps it was something more intimate, some change in faith, some silent decision that the dead should no longer sleep so close to the living. Now, when the soil is cut away by careful hands, the bones appear again. Women, men, and children, curled into their last shapes, the red dust of ochre still clinging to skulls that once saw the world from those same rooftops. The walls still hold the ghosts of their murals' horns, birds, the broad hips of a goddess. The hearths still carry the black kiss of fire. It is strange, standing over them. The houses are low now, their clay walls slumped, their roofs long gone. The ladders are missing. The sky opens wide above where ceilings once hung low. Yet you can still trace the map of the place in your mind, the rooftop paths, the ladder shafts, the rooms below with their cool earth floors, the dead sleeping, just beneath the reach of your shadow. And you can almost feel it, that hum, that constant weight of the past beneath your feet. You imagine lying down in one of those rooms, the walls close enough to hear your own breath, the air thick with the faint scent of grain and ash, and knowing that just beneath you is a grandmother, a child, a man who once stood where you stand. Perhaps they did not see it as an ending. Perhaps leaving was another layer of the same rhythm life, death, burial, and departure each, step folding into the next. Or perhaps they thought they would return and simply never did. The wind moves across the mound now, carrying dust from the surrounding plain. It hums through the grasses where the rooftops once touched each other edge to edge, where voices once rose in the heat of the day, where the living stepped without fear over the resting places of their own blood. From above, it looks like nothing more than a hill under the sky, but beneath, every floor still hums of the dead. The river does not forget. It carries the taste of centuries in its slow, brown breath. And on certain nights when the moon is swollen and pale, when mist slides low over the floodplain, the water seems to hum, as if speaking to the earth it once cradled. That earth still swells in the darkness, shaped by hands' long gone mounds that rise like sleeping giants east of the Mississippi, shadows under the silver glow. Here was Cahokia, a city that breathed between the river and the sky. Around the year 1200, its heart beat strong. Fires smouldered in thousands of hearths, the smoke coiling upward like prayers. The land itself had been transformed, flattened plazas, towering earthen pyramids, long ceremonial ways that seemed to draw the eye toward the horizon. And at its center, rising from the plain like a mountain forged from human labor, the great mound we call Monks, its flanks steep, its crown broad enough to hold a ruler's house, and the echo of drums. The people here watched the heavens. In a vast circle of upright cedar posts, the woodhenge they marked the passage of the sun, the shifting of seasons, the tilt of shadows at equinox and solstice. On certain mornings, when the first light broke over the eastern hills, the posts caught it in perfect alignment, and the city would awaken in ritual. You can almost hear it still, the stamping of feet on packed earth, the rattle of shells, the deep voice of drums echoing across the plaza. Cahokia was no village tucked against the wilderness. It was a metropolis, a place where tens of thousands gathered, farmers and artisans, hunters and traders. Pilgrims came bearing copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf, obsidian blades black as night from the far plains. Here, power was measured not only in harvests, but in the ability to move earth, to command hands by the thousands, to summon the sacred into the shape of the land itself. And yet, for all its greatness, the city's story is written in silence. We do not know the names of its rulers. We do not know the words of its prayers. The people left no stone monuments, no carved tablets, only these vast mounds, the darkened pits where posts once stood, the deep layers of earth that hide the traces of feasts and burials, of celebration and grief. There are whispers beneath the soil bones wrapped in finery, beads and copper lying cold in the dark. One mound holds the remains of a man laid out on a bed of shell beads, the image of a great bird spread beneath him. Around him, more than 50 young women, their lives cut short, their bodies laid with ritual care. Was this sacrifice for a ruler's journey into the next world? Was it the sealing of a covenant with the gods? We cannot say, but the earth remembers the weight of their bodies. For a time, Cahokia thrived, its mounds crowned with temples, its plazas alive with trade and ceremony. But slowly, a shadow crept over it. The air must have grown thick with wood smoke, the surrounding forests stripped back for fuel and building. The streams may have run brown with silt, the soil tired from too many harvests. The river, patient and powerful, shifted its channels, flooding the low fields. Some say factions turned against each other, that rival clans contended for power. Others speak of hunger, of a sky that withheld its rain. Whatever the cause, the great plazas fell quiet. The cedar posts rotted where they stood, falling one by one into the weeds. The houses on the mounds collapsed, their roofs sinking into themselves. Fires still burned for a time, but fewer each season. The songs grew thin in the air. Families left, their footsteps fading into the prairie grasses, into the forests, into the rolling hills beyond the horizon. By the time the first Europeans set eyes on this place, the city was gone. Only the mounds remained, holding their shapes against the wind and rain. The river passed by in its slow way, glancing against the shore where once it had fed a people's greatness. Stand here now, in the stillness of night, and you can feel how the air changes. The mounds loom like black ships under the moon. The grass bends and shivers in the breeze. Somewhere, water slips over stone in the dark, and the sound is like a voice speaking in a language you almost understand. If you close your eyes, the centuries melt away. You are standing in the plaza, the earth hard under your feet, the posts of the wood henge cutting black against the dawn. Drums beat in the distance, slow and deep, until you can feel them in your chest. Then the vision fades, and you are alone again. The mounds are still here, patient as they have always been, their shapes softened by time but unbroken. The moonlight spills over them like water over old stone. And you wonder how many lives were lived here, how many births, how many deaths, how many nights ended with faces turned to this same moon. The river does not forget. It carries their stories still, though they have dissolved into silt and shadow. And the mounds wait under the Mississippi moon, holding the weight of a city's memory in their silent, earthen hearts. The rain had not yet begun, but the air carried. Its scent heavy, metallic, full of the promise of water that would not stop. And somewhere in the delta, beneath the slow veils of morning mist, the people of Liangju moved through their final days without knowing. The river was calm then, the wetlands glistening under the low sun, the air thick with the sound of herons, and the smell of wet reeds. No shadow had yet fallen over the city's white walls, its causeways, its high earthen platforms that rose from the marsh like altars. They had built a world from water and stone, but above all, from jade. The cool green stone flowed from their hands, as if the earth had yielded its heart for them alone ritual blades that caught the dawn. Discs as smooth as frozen moons, pendants etched with the faces of spirits and beasts. In the courts of their rulers, these stones did not simply gleam, they spoke. They were the breath of ceremony, the conduit to powers unseen. Lianggu was a city of quiet dominion. Dams and levees held the river at bay. Channels stitched the wetlands into a living net of trade and irrigation. The rulers were priests, and the priests were rulers, those who commanded the flow of both water and devotion. Processions wound across the raised roadways, their steps soft against packed clay, bearing jade-like fragments of the sky fallen into their hands. They prayed to one God above all others distant, unyielding, whose face was never carved, whose name was never spoken outside the most solemn of rites. Around this god clustered lesser spirits, their forms curling in the jade itself. Eyes wide, jaws open, guardians in a realm between man and divinity. It should have lasted forever. But in the 23rd century, before the Common Age, the skies broke. The first rains may have seemed no different from the many that had come before. Liangju had been born in water and had mastered it. The people were not afraid. The great earthworks held firm, their walls tamped hard by generations of labor. But day by day the river swelled higher, its color turning from brown to the black of stirred depths. The rain did not pass, it thickened, deepened, became a weight that pressed the world into silence. The lowlands vanished under the spreading flood, and the levees, those proud lines between safety and ruin, began to seep. Perhaps there was no single moment of collapse, only the slow death of certainty. First the outlying fields drowned, there, harvests lost. Then the causeways stood like stranded spines above a body of water that spread as far as the eye could see. The marsh turned to sea dot, and still they must have tried to save their gods. Priests carried the jade from shrines and altars, lifting it high as the waters rose to their knees, to their waists. Rulers stood on the last dry ground and shouted orders into the wind that carried nothing back but the hiss of rain. Children watched from rooftops as the floods swallowed the streets, as familiar doors sank beneath rippling darkness. When the dams broke, it was not with a roar, but with the sound of the earth giving up. Clay dissolved into water. Whole walls slid away in silence, carrying home's grain, lives into the hungry current. The water did not retreat. It stayed heavy and brown until the city was no longer a city but a memory beneath the surface. Mud sealed the ruins as if writing their epitaph in layers of silt. The jade lay in darkness, its green light extinguished, its prayers interrupted mid-breath. No enemy came with fire or spear. No famine drove them to wander. Only the slow, unstoppable weight of the flood brought Liangju down. A civilization that had commanded the waters was taken by them, as if the god they had worshipped had called the river home to itself. Centuries turned to millennia. The river shifted its course. The land rose and sank in the long breath of the earth. Villagers came and went on the fringes of the drowned land, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. The jade slept under the weight of mud and time. Its carvings pressed against the ribs of the dead, its edges dulled but unbroken. And then, in the age of iron and smoke, in a time when no one remembered the name Lianggu, the earth began to speak. Again, shovels struck stone that was not stone, a smoothness that could only come from human hands. Farmers turned the soil and found eyes staring back, beasts etched in perfect lines, symbols without voice. Archaeologists dug deeper, peeling away the layers of clay, uncovering pavements, platforms, the skeletons of dams. Everywhere, jade, its surface kissed by the ghost light of the sun after 4,000 years of darkness. Each piece was a fragment of a sentence no one could fully read. A disk once held to the sky in worship, a blade buried in the chest of a ruler, a pendant worn by one who believed it could turn aside misfortune. They were relics of belief as much as of beauty-frozen moments of devotion, now stripped of the world that had given them meaning. When the mud gave up the last of them, it was not with violence, but with a kind of reluctant grace. The flood had destroyed, yes, but it had also preserved. The carvings were as clear as the day they were made. The gods of Liangju still stared from their stone faces, still held their silence. Now the city exists only as shadow and earthwork, as diagrams in books, as glass-cased treasures under museum lights. But if you stand in the wetlands at dusk, when the sky folds itself into silver and the reeds whisper under the wind, you can almost feel it, the press of humid air against the skin, the reflection of the moon on jade, the tremor in the earth. As the river gathers itself beyond the levees, you might hear footsteps on the raised causeways, faint but insistent, as if someone is still walking toward the altar. You might see a glint just under the dark water, not the flash of a fish, but something colder, smoother, a tear shed by a god. And you might realize, as the night closes around you, that the flood never truly left its weight. Somewhere in the bones of the land, the jade too waits, shimmering in the dark, carrying the shape of prayers for a god whose name the river has long since taken. Before the plough, before the village, before the seed met soil and called it home, there was a hill. And on that hill, in the breathless mornings before the sun rose fully over the horizon, men and women walked barefoot through dust, carrying stones heavier than any one of them could bear alone. They came not to live here, but to build. Not to build homes, but something far stranger, something that would outlast even their own memory of why they had come. The pillars rose slowly, year upon year, shaped by flint chisels and calloused hands, T-shaped, taller than any man, carved with the sinew and curve of beasts' foxes, darting in eternal chase. vultures stretching wings in mid-flight, serpents curling as if to slip free from the stone. These were not the creatures of a distant forest. They were spirits of the hunt, the breath of the earth made form. In the cold, thin light of morning, the pillars cast long shadows across bare ground. Circles grew in the dust rings of stone that marked no dwelling, no field. Here was no hearth, no sign of cooking, no cradle for a child. The people came with offerings and left again, returning to the wild that still owned them. The circles were for the gods or for something older than gods. Perhaps they believed the world was young enough to be spoken to directly, if only the right shapes were carved, the right stones set in place. Perhaps they thought the beasts they hunted could be persuaded, flattered, or bound through ritual. Or perhaps the pillars were a way to remember what could not be written, a library of stone. Each creature and symbol a word in a language the wind once spoke, and then, for reasons no voices carried to us, they buried it. It was not neglect. That took Göbekli Tepe. The people did not simply wander away and let the dust reclaim it. No, layer by layer, they filled the spaces between the stones with rubble and earth, sealing the pillars inside as if tucking a body into its grave. What had once stood under the open sky now lay hidden under a man-made hill, a mound that grew taller with each shovelful. What was it they feared? Or what was it they honored in such a way? Was it shame, or was it devotion? In the circle's heart, two great pillars stand taller than the rest, facing each other in a silent conversation. No one alive can overhear. Each bears the faint outline of arms, hands folded across a belly, a gesture neither entirely human nor entirely beast. They do not have faces, yet they seem to watch. To stand between them is to feel the air close in, as though the stones remember what they once saw. Imagine the last day before the burial began. Torches guttering in the pre-dawn dark, voices chanting low, the sound of stone on stone as loose rock is poured into the gaps. The pillars disappearing inch by inch, the carvings swallowed, the foxes running for the last time in open air before the soil took them. Perhaps children watched, not knowing why their elders worked so intently, feeling only the gravity of the moment. The hill grew over centuries, a slow interment. The circles vanished from the surface, replaced by scrub and dust, until nothing remained to hint at what lay beneath. The land kept its secret for thousands of years, until steel and spade uncovered the first edge of a stone carved by hands that had never known the wheel, the field, or the village. Now, when the wind sweeps over Göbekli Tepe, it carries both silence and voices, the silence of absence, the voices of the dead caught in the curves of stone beasts. Standing there, among the excavated rings, you feel the weight of a purpose too large to name. You see the foxes, the vultures, the serpents, their edges worn but their meanings still alive enough to unsettle. You walk between the tall twin pillars, and you realize they are not ruins in the usual sense. They are as they were meant to be, preserved exactly as the last hands left them, entombed to outlast even time's hunger. At dusk, the sight takes on another life. Shadows stretch across the rings, the carvings deepen in relief, and for a moment the beasts seem to move again. The air feels closer, denser, as though the hill itself is breathing. You begin to understand why they might have buried it. Some things are too powerful to leave exposed under the open sky. No one knows the name of the god, if God it was, for whom these temples were raised. No one knows what final act or revelation led to their burial. But the stones are not mute. They murmur in the language of dust and shadow, of forms cut into limestone with a devotion no ploughman's field could match. And perhaps that is the truest mystery, that before we sowed wheat or built walls, we built this. Before we named kings, we named the fox, the serpent, the vulture. Before we bound ourselves to the land, we bound ourselves to the stones. The night closes in, the last light glancing off the carved backs of animals frozen mid-motion. The hill is quiet now, but not empty. You can feel it's the weight of something still waiting beneath the surface, as if the earth has not yet finished its work. The stones will outlast us, as they outlasted those who first raised them. They will wait, as they always have, for the day the soil decides to let them go again. The wind on Rapa Nui moves like an old memory's low, persistent, brushing over the grass as though it seeks to stir something long buried. On this lonely shard of land adrift in the great Pacific, the sky is wide enough to swallow a man whole, and the sea gnaws at the island's edges with endless patience. Here, under the unblinking gaze of stone, silence is not empty. It is watchful. The moai stand in rows, shoulders squared, eyes hollow but seeing. They face inland, not toward the ocean that isolates them, but toward the villages that once bustled at their feet. They are not gods. They are not idols. They are memory made flesh of stone ancestors, drawn up from the dark belly of the volcano, and set upon the land to keep vigil. Their skin is the color of cooled fire, their features hewn with the slow rhythm of obsidian chisels. Some bear the weight of red stone crowns, heavy and improbable, balanced with care atop their heads. Others are weathered, their faces smoothed by centuries of salt wind, their lips pressed tight as if holding back words no one will ever hear in the beginning. The quarry was alive with labor. Men cut the great bodies from the volcano's slope, coaxing giants from the rock as though birthing them from the earth itself. Hours became days, days became years, and the hillside sprouted forms unfinished, moai lying prone in the stone, half freed. Songs rose in time with the blows of the tools, chants to call strength into weary arms. When a moai was ready, it was moved not by magic, but by human will. Ropes of twisted fiber, teams of men straining together, the figure swaying upright, as if learning to walk. Step by step, mile by mile, they coaxed the giants across the plains, leaving no scars in the ground, only in their bodies. It was a procession both sacred and perilous, for each statue was the presence of the ancestor themselves, and to topple one was to invite disaster, along the coast and on the ridges. Stone platforms, wotudahu, built to cradle the moai in their final stance. From there, they would watch forever over the living. The villagers could look up from their gardens, their fires, their fishing canoes, and see the faces of those who had gone before, still guiding, still guarding. In their gaze was strength, in their silence reassurance. But the world behind their eyes began to fracture. The island was small, the people many. Palms once shaded the slopes, roots deep in the volcanic soil, trunks strong enough to bear canoes and haul moai. One by one, they fell to axes and flame, first to clear fields, then to move statues, then simply because the forest did not return fast enough to meet the hunger of need. Without trees, the soil washed thin under the rain. Birds vanished, their nesting grounds stripped bare. The sea grew harder to reach without great canoes. Hunger came like a patient shadow, and with hunger came anger. The moai, once protectors, became symbols of failing promises. Rival clans, their own ancestors' eyes fixed upon them, turned on each other. Platforms were raided in the night, statues pulled down, their faces smashed into the earth. Some fell forward, others backward, the crash echoing over empty fields like a drumbeat of betrayal. The chants stopped, the quarries grew still. The half-born moai on the volcano's flank were left in place, their forms never lifted into the sun. Grass grew over the scars in the stone. The old pathways that once bore giants turned into empty tracks, the wind claiming them grain by grain. The final years were not kind. Without trees, there was no escape from the island's prison. Without birds, no eggs to gather. Without soil, no abundance from the gardens. Whispers tell of famine so deep that flesh itself became food, the living gnawing at the bones of the dead. Whether this is truth or accusation, no one can say. But in the eyes of the fallen moai, there is no judgment, only the stillness of those who have seen everything and speak of none of it. Now the island breathes under the weight of its own ghosts. The moai that remain standing gaze not into the future, but into a past only they remember. Some lie broken, their heads lolling in the grass, their features softened by centuries of rain. Others stand tall, their backs to the sea, their faces turned toward what was once the heart of their world. At dusk, when the sky bleeds into the ocean and the wind carries the scent of salt and earth, the moai seem to lean closer. Their shadows stretch across the ground like the fingers of something reaching out, not to claim, but to remind. The air thickens with a presence that is not quite alive, not quite gone, and if you stand among them long enough, you may feel it, that invisible tether between the living and the dead, the pull of all that was built, lost, and left behind. The gaze of the moai is heavy, not with accusation, but with the sorrow of endurance. They have watched their people rise, thrive, falter, vanish. They have seen the forest fall and the sea become a wall. They have watched the land grow quiet, yet they remain. On nights when the moon is full and the wind is low, their silhouettes cut sharp against the silver sky, and you can almost believe they are breathing. That behind the hollow eyes there is thought, that somewhere in the stone the voices of the ancestors still murmur not in words, but in the language of patience. They will stand until they can no longer, until the sea, in its eternal hunger, takes the island piece by piece, until the wind wears their faces smooth and featureless, until the grass grows so high it swallows them whole. But even then, even buried, they will still be here, waiting, watching, holding the memory of Rapa, Nui in their silent gaze. In the green heart of Chiapas, where the air is thick with the breath of leaves and the slow drip of unseen water, a city sleeps beneath the jungle's shroud. The stone there is not dead, it sweats, it breathes, it listens. Roots coil around. The corners of temples, their patient grip prying the work of kings back into the earth. Above, the canopy murmurs in a language older than the city itself, and somewhere a bird's cry echoes like the sharp crack of a distant drum. Palenque rises from the undergrowth like a dream halfway remembered, its palaces, its towers, its stepped pyramids breaking through the green tide. Once their faces gleamed white in the sun, their edges crisp against a blue sky. Once the air was filled not with the hum of insects, but with the clamor of the living, priests ascending the temple steps in robes heavy with jade. The low roar of the crowd gathered below, the deep, resonant boom of drums calling the gods to attention. Here, kings were more than men. They were chosen vessels, their blood the bridge between the mortal and divine. In carved glyphs, their names rise like constellations, Pakal the Great, whose reign stretched into the decades like a river winding through the jungle. Canbolam, the jaguar serpent, inheritor of power and vision. Their deeds are written in stone, in lines as precise and deliberate as the beating of a heart. Wars fought and won, marriages bound in blood, the descent into the underworld and the return with divine favor, each captured in an alphabet of curves and talons, each a promise that memory would endure. But the stones do not speak of the ending. Some say the rains betrayed them, falling too little or too much, turning their fields to dust or to drowning mud. Others speak of sickness that crept through the streets like a shadow, stealing the breath of both the lowborn and the high. Still others whisper of a war that began in the far cities and spilled into Palenque like a flood of rivals who did not simply want victory, but obliteration. Whatever the truth, the hands that carved the king's names grew still. The glyphs stopped mid-breath. There are walls where the story breaks in an instant a panel begun, its figures half-formed, as though the sculptor had stepped away and never returned. There are temples whose murals still gleam in the half-light, the painted gods smiling in colors that have survived 1,000 years, though the people who worshipped them are long gone. And there are statues' faces, serene, eyes wide that have been toppled, their noses broken, their lips swallowed by the soil. When the heart of Palenque faltered, the jungle did not wait. Vines slithered up the stairways, moss blurred the sharp corners of the palaces. The trees bent low over the plazas, their roots like the fingers of grave robbers, prying open the tombs. Yet inside those tombs, time itself seemed to halt. Deep beneath the temple of the inscriptions lies the resting place of Pakal the Great. His tomb is a chamber of hushed stone, its walls painted with the journey of his soul, the descent through the jaws of the earth monster, the climb into the celestial realm. On his face rests a mask of jade, cool and eternal, its green depths polished to a sheen that still catches the light like water. Around him lie shells from distant seas, offerings of maize, and the bones of those who followed him into death. It is a place where breath feels unwelcome, where even the sound of one's own heartbeat seems too loud. The air carries the weight of centuries, pressing down on the living until they, too, feel part of the burial. Outside, the city's great towers lender, rising like a hand in benediction, once watched the horizon for omens. Its windows are now the nesting places of birds, its stones warmed by the sun and cooled by the night rain. The ball courts lie empty, their smooth surfaces no longer echoing the heavy thump of the rubber ball, no longer witnessing the games that were prayers in motion. And yet, there are moments when Palenque stirs. At dawn, when the fog clings low to the plazas and the first light turns the stone to gold, it is not difficult to imagine the kings walking there again. The murmur of leaves could almost be the rustle of their robes. The cries of the jungle birds could almost be the notes of their flutes. But the city is not alive. It is held in the stillness of a breath that will never be released. Its kings remain frozen in their poses, caught between motion and memory. Their gods, unnamed now, peer from the worn carvings with the same inscrutable gaze they held when the temples were new. The jungle, indifferent to the glory it has claimed, continues its slow work. Each year, more stone succumbs to shadow. Each year, the inscriptions grow fainter, their stories fading into patterns no one can read. Perhaps that is the final act of power the gods demanded, that the mortal tongue would one day lose its place, and the city's truth would return to them alone at night. When the moon drapes silver over the ruins, and the air hangs heavy with the scent of earth and flowers unseen. Palenque belongs to silence. The wind threads through the empty corridors, curling around doorways that open onto nothing. Frogs call from the pools that have gathered in the old courtyards. Somewhere far off, a branch snaps under the weight of some unseen creature, and for a heartbeat. The darkness feels aware. It is easy to believe the kings still walk their city in those hours, barefoot on the cool stone, trailing their fingers along the walls, their eyes lingering on the work of their craftsmen. Perhaps they pause before the unfinished panels, their faces unreadable, as though trying to recall what words were meant to fill that space. Perhaps they gaze up at the tower and remember when it was their watchtower, their vantage over a world that had not yet slipped from their grasp, and perhaps they return to their tombs before the dawn, lying down in the dark as the first birds begin to call, the weight of centuries settling over them once more. The jungle will go on reclaiming Palenque until the last stone is covered, until the plazas become nothing more than mounds beneath the trees, until only the gods and moved, unnamed remain. But the kings are not gone. They are here in the breath of the fog, in the hush of the tomb, in the broken glyph that ends in mid-stroke. They are here in the way the air seems to grow thicker in the plazas, as if history itself lingers, unwilling to be scattered by the wind. The city sleeps, but it does not dream. Its story is complete, even if no one knows the ending, and so it waits beneath the vines, beneath the weight of the years, beneath the patience of gods who have no need for time, beneath the rolling plains of Cappadocia, under hills the color of ash and gold. There is a darkness older than memory. The land above is windswept, carved by time into soft folds and sudden spires of stone, where shadows shift with the passing clouds and the wind whispers like a keeper of secrets. But far below, where the sun has never touched, a city sleeps. In the cold, hollow quiet of the earth, they call it Dorinque. Its gates are not the kind that swing in the open air, but round stones, heavier than 10 men could lift, wheels of basalt rolled into place, sealing the mouth of the passage behind them. Beyond them, the world descends, level by level, deeper into the embrace of the stone. There are no windows here, no wind, no scent of grass or rain. The air tastes of dust and of something metallic, faint and old, like the breath of a long-forgotten tomb. The first steps are narrow, the ceiling low enough to brush a man's head, as though the rock itself wishes to remind you that you are trespassing into its lungs. But then the tunnels widen into chambers, a place where once bread was baked, the ovens still black with soot that no hand has touched for centuries. Another chamber, long and arched, where wine jars once lined the walls, their clay mouths sealed against the damp. There is a church carved in the living rock, its altar simple, unadorned, lit in its day only by the trembling flames of oil lamps. Down here, water was drawn not from rivers or wells beneath the sky, but from deep shafts that reached toward an underground stream. Air was breathed not in stillness, but through a network of ventilation shafts so tall they might have taken days to carve, each one feeding the city's lungs. They say 20,000 souls could live here at once, 20,000 heartbeats echoing in the stone, 20,000 whispers rising and falling like the tide, 20,000 pairs of feet padding along the labyrinth's corridors. Children would have been born here, learning to run along the same halls their ancestors carved. The old would have died here, their bodies carried quietly through passages narrower than a coffin, and yet the silence now is complete. No one knows exactly who first dug into the soft volcanic rock, nor what danger drove them underground. The stone is easy to shape, but hard to destroy. Each strike of the chisel rang out like a bell in those hollow spaces, echoing up and down. The levels, perhaps it began as small refuges, hiding places from raiders or armies, each generation adding another level, another passage, until the city's roots were as deep as any trees. Perhaps it was built not out of fear, but devotion. Hidden kingdom where the faithful could live apart, sheltered from the corruptions of the surface. But one thing is certain, they left. There is no char of burning, no skeletons slumped in corners, no walls marked with the fury of battle. The great stone doors were not smashed, in they were rolled, shut from within and left that way. The bread ovens went cold, the lamps guttered out. Dust fell slowly from the ceilings, laying its grey shroud over everything that had been dot. Was it the slow, invisible hand of famine, a sickness that crept from chamber to chamber until the city's breath failed? Or did the people leave willingly, walking up the sloping tunnels toward the light, carrying with them only what they could hold, never to return? There are moments in the stillness when it is easy to believe they might come back, that the sudden rush of air through a shaft is the sigh of a hidden door opening, that the faint scrape of your own foot on stone is a child running just out of sight. The city is too complete, too deliberate, to feel truly abandoned. It feels paused. The deeper you go, the more the air changes. The weight of the earth above is not felt on the shoulders, but in the ribs, in the pulse. Here are the stables, where the breath of animals must once have mingled with that of men. Here are the great communal rooms, where voices would have risen together in song or prayer, blending into a single tone that the stone walls must have drunk in eagerly. Here are the storehouses, their alcoves carved in patient rows, waiting for grain that will never come. And then, in the lowest levels, there is only darkness. These are not places for the unprepared. The air thins, and the stone seems to close in. The ceiling presses low, the corridors narrow until two cannot pass abreast. It is easy to lose yourself here, to turn a corner and find only blackness in every direction, to imagine that the stone doors have rolled shut behind you, sealing you in forever with the city's unspoken past. In that blackness, the mind begins to conjure. You see shapes where there are none, faces half formed in the walls, shadows that move without light. You hear sounds too soft to name, the brush of something that might be cloth against the stone. You begin to understand why some believe that city is not empty, only hidden, its people waiting in a silence that has lasted longer than empires. And when, at last, you ascend, through the long spirals and narrow slits of light, the air above feels strange. The wind is too loud, the sky too vast. The hills roll out in every direction, innocent of the labyrinth that sleeps beneath them. The grass bends in the breeze, the sun moves across the sky, and life goes on, blind to the shadow city that was, carved, lived in, and left without a word. Darinkyu does not cry out to be remembered. It does not demand that its story be told. It lies patient, its halls as cold as the day they were left, its doors ready to roll shut at a moment's notice. The stone does not care if centuries pass before footsteps return, but if you listen closely in its deepest chamber, you might hear it. Not words, not voices, just the faintest suggestion of movement, like a sigh breathed into the stone. A reminder that there was a time when the city was alive, when its silence was not absence but safety, and perhaps when the surface world grows dangerous again, When the winds carry the scent of fire or the sound of war drums, someone will remember. The doors will turn, the lamps will be lit, and the earth will open its lungs to breathe life into Dorinkyu once more. Until then, it waits silent, patient, endless, in the dry riverbeds of the Indus, where the wind carries the sigh of an ancient tide. There are fragments of a language that once bound a people together. They are smallsome, no larger than a thumbprint baked clay seals, chipped steer-tight, weathered shards that once fit into the palm of a hand. Upon them are carved signs, as neat and deliberate as if the carver feared to mar their perfection. Tiny creatures stride across their faces, unicorns that never walked the earth, bulls with crescent horns, tigers caught mid-prowl beneath lines of symbols. So precise they seem less written than conjured. The river that once fed their cities is gone now. The streets of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro lie under centuries of silt and sun. Their walls still stand in measured brick, laid in perfect symmetry, as though the people who raised them thought their cities would live forever. But the voices of those who walked those streets have not reached us. They are trapped in the lines and loops of a script no one can read, in the half-light of a museum. One such seal rests under glass. Its edges are smooth from 1,000 years of handling. The creature at its center faces left, horn like a crescent moon curling from its brow, and above it are 5 signs. The first looks like a pair of dancing flames, the second like a fish with its head turned skyward, the others like fences, ladders, bowls turned upside down. They have survived floods, fire, the slow, patient crush of the earth itself, but not the meaning that once lived in them. That has fled. We call them words, but they may not be words. We call them letters, but they may not be letters. Each is carved with the confidence of a script that was meant to be understood instantly by those who knew it. Perhaps they named kings or merchants. Perhaps they marked blessings upon goods or prayers to invisible gods. Perhaps they whispered secrets only to those who had the key. There is an ache in looking at them. It is the ache of standing before a locked door whose key was lost before you were born, and knowing that behind it is not treasure or gold, but a voice, a human voice that you will never hear. The Harappans wrote as they built with order and care. Their cities were grids, their drains ran clean, their wells were deep and shared. They traded far beyond the curve of their horizon, sending beads of carnelian and etched pottery to lands whose names they might never have spoken aloud. And wherever they went, they carried these signs with them, pressing them into clay to leave, a mark as certain as a fingerprint. But then the river began to wander, the monsoons faltered, the trade that fed them slowed, and the cities emptied like vessels tipped toward the sand. When the last Harappan walked away from Mohenjo-Daro, the seals were left behind, their signs staring upward as dust began to fall. The script had been passed from hand to hand for centuries. Then, all at once, no hand remembered. Now, across. The world's scholars gather in dim-lit rooms with stacks of photographs, tracing the patterns again and again. They find repetition. This sign always follows, that these 3 always come in pairs. This one sits only at the end. They build rules, like the bones of a skeleton, but the flesh the meaning never forms. The script offers grammar without breath, architecture without inhabitants. Sometimes in the quiet, you can imagine the first person who wrote them. A scribe, perhaps, seated in the shade of a mud-brick wall, tool in hand, drawing each curve with the certainty of someone who has seen these shapes since childhood. They were not making art for strangers. They were not writing for us. They wrote for neighbors, for merchants, for the gods. The thought that their marks might someday be read by none would have been absurd to them, as absurd as imagining the sun failing to rise. And yet here we are, staring at them through the glass, hearing nothing. The deeper one goes into this mystery, the more it begins to resemble a dream that dissolves upon waking. Some believe the symbols are not a language at all, but an elaborate code of signs, no more meant to be spoken than the tally marks of a shepherd's stick. Others say they are a language so strange to us, built on concepts we cannot fathom, that we mistake it for nonsense. Some cling to the hope that somewhere, buried in the earth, there lies a longer text, a tablet or wall covered in these signs, side by side, with another script we know, a Rosetta Stone for the Indus, but the earth has offered no such gift, and so we are left with fragments. A seal dropped in a marketplace, lost for 4,000 years, a shard of pottery with 3 signs scratched into its rim, a copper plate whose edges are corroded to nothing, leaving only half a thought. Each is like a heartbeat heard through a wall-proof of life, but no sense of the words it beats for. There is a strange cruelty in this. Other vanished civilizations left us songs and prayers in scripts we could learn to read, voices we could coax from the grave. But the Harapans left us a language we can see but never hear, a language whose silence feels heavier than the ruins themselves. If you walk through Mohenjo-daro at dusk, the wind will comb through its streets, soft as a hand on your shoulder. The bricks are still warm from the day's sun. You pass a well, a bathing platform, a granary whose walls still stand. You see the marks in the stone where water once flowed. You pass into shadow, the air cooling, and for a moment you can almost imagine that someone will turn the corner. A figure with a seal in one hand, fresh clay in the other, ready to press the signs into being. But no one comes. The script waits, patient as the desert, unmoved by our attempts to know it. The signs lie quiet, their curves and lines fixed in eternal order, refusing to betray their meaning. They are not hostile, they are not shy, they are simply beyond reach, like stars seen from the bottom of a deep well. And perhaps this is their final truth, that some connections cannot be remade, that some words are meant to live only in their own time. We have inherited the shape of the Harapans' thoughts, but not their soul. Somewhere, long ago, a scribe set down his tool, his work complete. He looked at the signs, perhaps smiled at their perfection, and handed the seal to the one who had commissioned it. He could not have known that he had just written something no one would ever read again. The seal was pressed into clay, the mark left crisp and whole. Then the hands that knew how to read it vanished, one by one, until none remained. The mark endured as stone endures, carrying its silence through the ages. And so the Harappan script endures, still an enigma without anger, a voice without sound, a message that will never arrive. The riverbeds are dry now, the city's hollow, the seals cracked with age. Yet in every line carved into them, there is the faint pulse of a people who once spoke to each other in a tongue as natural to them as the breath they drew. We will never know their words, but we can stand in the quiet and listen to their silence. And in that silence, if we are still enough, we might feel the echo of their hearts. The river is a mirror at dawn, black glass beneath a shroud of white mist. The air is thick enough to drink, heavy with the scent of wet earth and crushed leaves. Insects murmur in the dimness, their voices like the far-off hiss of rain. The forest leans close on every side, a cathedral of green where sunlight filters in narrow, trembling blades. Somewhere deep within this endless breath of foliage, a city sleeps its stones, swallowed by roots. its streets buried under centuries of fallen leaves, its plazas now open to no one but the rain. The people of the river speak of it in fragments, in half-remembered stories told around fires whose smoke curls up to meet the night. They call it a place where the walls rose higher than the tallest palm, where streets shone with stone in the sun, where the air hummed with drums and chants that rolled like distant thunder. They say it is still there, under the vines, its heart, still beating softly in the darkness, waiting for someone to listen. But the forest is a jealous keeper. It hides what it holds. For centuries, the jungle swallowed every road that led toward it, every trail marked by human hand. Vines wound themselves into bridges until the bridges broke. Trees spread roots through the courtyards until the stones were cracked and lifted. The green tide closed over all, yet the stories would not die. Explorers carried them like fever dream staleys of a great city hidden in the interior, where gold shone like captured sunlight and the people lived in a beauty unmatched by any on the earth. One such dreamer was Percy Fawcett, a man with eyes like weathered steel and a heart that refused to bow to reason. He called the place the City of Z, and for him it was less rumor than destiny. He imagined avenues broad enough for armies, temples crowned with strange carved beasts, markets spilling over with treasures from lands beyond the horizon. Time and again he entered the green labyrinth, tracing rivers whose names fell like whispers from his maps, crossing land where the air itself seemed to pulse with secrecy. And time and again the forest sent him back. Core kept those who went too far. The last time it kept him. Some believe he found the city, that its walls rose before him at last out of the mist, and that he walked into its gates never to return, claimed by its silence. Others believe he lies beneath the roots somewhere, another bone in the soil, his dream dissolving into the deep hum of the forest's breath. Whatever the truth, the city remained hidden, watching. It is not made of gold, not any more if it ever was. Its wealth was not in treasure, but in the way it gathered life around it. From the air, when the mist lifts, one can see the faint lines still pressed into the skin of the earth, roads that run like veins through the forest, plazas now softened into clearings, embankments that once held back rivers or marked the edges of gardens. The patterns are too precise to be nature's, alone rings and lines, grids and causeways, all aligned to the sun and stars. And in those spaces, centuries ago, there was order, there was ceremony. People gathered in the plazas at dusk when the air cooled and torches were lit so the flames danced in the eyes of the gathered crowd. They traded in markets where baskets overflowed with fruit, their skins split with ripeness, and with pottery painted in colors drawn from earth and root. Processions wound through the streets, draped in feathers that shimmered in the light, drums beating in the chest like a second heart. Children grew up knowing every turn of the cities, streets, every story told in the carvings on the walls. They believed the forest began where their city ended, but the forest had other plans. Perhaps it was a sickness carried in from far away, burning through the city like wildfire. Perhaps it was war, the gates falling under strange banners. Perhaps it was hunger, the soil giving less each year until the plazas stood empty, their stones warm under a sun no one came to feel. Or perhaps it was slower, quiet exodus, family by family, until the streets were hollow and the jungle stepped forward to claim what had been left behind. The city did not fall in a roar of flames or the crash of walls. It fell in whispers, roots creeping under doors, moss spreading across stone, the drip of water wearing away the carvings of the gods. Birds nested in the rafters where once the banners had flown. Monkeys swung through the open windows of the council hall. The drums stopped. The air grew still, and in the stillness the forest grew louder today. Even with the eyes of the sky satellites cutting their patient lines above the clouds, the city reveals itself only in pieces. The outlines of plazas traced in the soil, their symmetry too perfect to be chance. The embankments of roads, faint but straight, leading nowhere visible. The shadow of a wall under the canopy, where the trees grow in an unnatural arc as though still leaning away from a long-vanished presence. Those who know where to look say the city still breathes, that the roots and vines are only its cloak, the trees its sentinels, that under the leaves the stone still remembers the press of human footsteps. And in the right hour, when the mist thins and the cicadas pause, you can hear the faint echo of a drum from far away. But it is not a city for the living now. It belongs to the green, to the rain, to the endless hum of insect and leaf. It has passed into the realm of myth, where time no longer matters. Its walls are not measured in meters, but in the depth of silence they hold. Its streets no longer lead to markets or temples, but to the dream of what was once possible here. And yet the thought lingers. Perhaps it is not gone. Perhaps it waits. There is a cruelty in the forest, but also a strange mercy. By burying the city, it has preserved it. The same roots that split its walls shield them from the sun's bleaching touch. The same leaves that conceal its streets also keep them from the erasing hand of wind. The city rests in a green tomb, but it is an unbroken one. One day, the mist will part again for someone bold or foolish enough to follow the old lines in the earth. They will walk through the hush of the forest until the first stone rises. Before them, its carvings blurred but still telling the story of the people who built it. They will step into the plaza, now a meadow under the canopy, and feel the air shift, as though the city is aware of their presence. And in that moment, they will know this place was never lost. It was only hiding until that day the city remains. In its dream, the roads sleep under carpets of moss. The plazas breathe in the cool shadow. The ceremonial earthworks hold their lines beneath centuries of fallen leaves. Above, the forest whispers and hisses, as if speaking in a language too old for us to understand. And somewhere in that vast and endless green, the city in the mist waits, patient as stone, breathing with the slow rhythm of the earth. The Kalahari is not a desert in the way others are. It does not roll in endless dunes like the Sahara, nor lie bare and white under a sun that bleaches all it touches. It is a land of whispers, half sand, half scrub, a restless sea of thorn trees, dry grass, and red earth that shimmers in the heat. Its distances are deceptive, its horizons infinite. It is a place where a man may walk for days and feel he has gone nowhere at all, where the wind seems to remember things it will never tell. It was into this ancient silence that William Leonard Hunt, known to the world as the Great Farini, rode in the late years of the 19th century. He was a man of stages and spectacles, a conjurer of feats, but the Kalahari gave him no applause. Instead, it gave him something stranger. Farini returned from the desert with a vision. He spoke of stone blocks laid one upon another, weathered but deliberate. He described walls stretching across the sand, a great arc of masonry half buried in drift, and the remnants of a vaulted chamber that might once have been a temple or a tomb. The stones, he said, were not of the surrounding land. Their faces bore the marks of cutting, their lines too straight for accident. He claimed to have stood among the ruins as the sun bled out behind the horizon, watching the shadows pool inside the collapsed walls. He could almost feel the presence of those who had stood there before him, their language lost, their names worn away like carvings erased by wind. The story took root. Newspapers printed sketches of a city half swallowed by sand, its red stones glowing under a sky like hammered copper. Mapmakers inked in a faint question mark deep in the Kalahari's heart. Expeditions were mounted, each one chasing the echo of Ferini's discovery, each one certain they would be the ones to uncover the truth. But the desert is a master of deception. The first seekers found nothing but a sun and thirst. The second returned with stories of strange rock ridges, weathered into shapes that could fool the eye. The third never came back at all, and the wind erased their trail within days. With each failure, the city slipped further into legend, its shape softening, its location becoming a blur of contradictory accounts. Some said it lay to the north, where the land rises into low hills. Others swore it was westward, beyond the salt pans, where the earth turns white under the merciless sun. A few insisted it moved, appearing and disappearing like a mirage there for a heartbeat, gone when one drew close. As decades passed, the dream grew fragile under the weight of explanation. Geologists came, carrying their tools and their science. They walked the Kalahari and studied its stones. The walls, they said, were no walls at all, but natural outcroppings of dolerite lava turned to stone, split by heat and wind into geometric shapes that could trick a weary traveler's mind. The temple was only a hollow where the rock had fractured and fallen away. It was a tidy answer, but not everyone believed it. There is a difference between a shape that merely resembles something and a place that holds the weight of human presence. Ferini had felt that weight. Others, too, have stood in the Kalahari and sensed a hush that is not the hush of empty land, but the hush of something waiting. The desert is old enough to have seen empires rise and fall without leaving a trace. Its sands have buried rivers, erased roads, swallowed entire seasons of human memory. What, then, would it mean for it to keep the bones of a city hidden in plain sight beneath a veil of stone and thorn? The wind moves across the Kalahari like the slow breath of an ancient animal. It carries dust from 1,000 years ago. In certain lights, when the sun is low and the heat has gone soft, the land changes. The ridges seem to align into streets. The flat stones form squares that could be courtyards. A standing pillar casts a shadow shaped like a doorway. You can walk for hours in that light, thinking yourself on the edge of revelation until the sun drops below the horizon and the illusion shatters. Perhaps that is the city's true nature, a mirage not of water but of memory. Still, the stories persist in the scattered villages that skirt the Kalahari's edge. There are elders who speak of a place where the ancestors lived in great numbers, where their homes were made of red stone and their cattle grazed on grass that grew high and thick even in the dry months. They speak of a time when the land was not so empty, when the wells never failed. But when they are asked where this place lies, they only smile and look toward the horizon, as though its location is not a matter of distance, but of the right moment to see it. Some believe the city was abandoned when the rains failed, its people scattering to the edges of the desert. Others say it was cursed, its builders punished for some forgotten sin. There are even those who whisper it was never built by human hands at all, but by gods who shaped the land for their own purposes, then left it behind when their work was done. Whatever the truth, the city has mastered the art of absence. Expeditions still come, armed with maps and machines, with aerial surveys and ground-penetrating instruments. They leave with images of fractured rock, with data that can be explained. A dozen ways, with stories that never quite match the dream. The Kalahari swallows their ambitions the way it swallows footprints, but every so often a traveler will return with eyes lit in the way Farini's must have been. They speak of finding themselves in a place where the air felt different, heavier, as though they had stepped into the breath of another time. They describe stones that seemed too carefully placed to be chance, a pattern in the earth too deliberate to be the work of wind alone. They say they felt watched not in menace, but in the way one feels in a church or a tomb. The desert says nothing. It lets them go, carrying their story, and waits for the next. Perhaps one day the sands will shift, and the city will stand revealed in the clean light of morning. Perhaps its streets will be walked again, and its stones will speak their history to those who listen. Or perhaps it will remain as it is now, half real, half dream, a shadow in the heat haze. There is a strange mercy in that. What is seen too clearly loses its power. What is half hidden keeps its mystery. And so the Kalahari holds its secret. The red earth burns under the sun by day and glows faintly under the stars by night. The thorn trees whisper in the wind. Somewhere, out there, perhaps 100 miles from where we imagine, perhaps just beyond the next rise stone, lies upon stone, warm to the touch. Patient under the weight of centuries, Fernie's city may have been an illusion. Or it may still be there, its heart beating under layers of dust and silence. In this land, the difference between the two is as thin as the shadow of a cloud on sand. The Kalahari keeps its own counsel. It remembers more than it will ever tell. Beneath the restless skin of the sea, there is a heartbeat no living ear has ever truly heard. It is slow, older than storms, and heavy with the weight of what it keeps. At night, when the tide swells and the moon spills silver over black water, you might almost feel it a faint tremor, as though something vast and dreaming stirs far below. They say the drowned have their own cities, and among them none is greater than the one the ancients called Atlantis. It is not a small story, nor a quiet one. It begins, as all myths do, in an age before forgetting an age, when gods still walked. The world and mortals shaped mountains into walls. In Plato's telling, Atlantis was a jewel in the ocean, a ringed island gleaming with marble and gold, its harbors crowded with ships, its streets alive with voices. The Atlanteans knew the secret of harmony between land and sea, the balance of order and abundance. It was said that gardens bloomed even in winter, that towers rose in white perfection from emerald fields, that music carried over the canals at dusk like the sigh of a satisfied world. But even in paradise, ambition grows. The old philosophers spoke of how Atlantis turned from virtue to hunger, from reverence to conquest. It reached across the waters to claim more than the gods had given. And when its pride reached the height of its towers, the sky turned against it. The sea rose with a roar. The earth shook, tearing the stone from its foundations. And in a single terrible night, the island and all its splendor were swallowed. The ocean closed above it, leaving nothing but the silence of the deep. For more than 2,000 years, that silence has spoken louder than fact. The name of Atlantis drifts through history like a candle's glow glimpsed across a dark field, sometimes near, sometimes impossibly far. Sailors swore to have seen its spires through clear water on windless days. Scholars searched old maps for coastlines that had slipped into the blue, Adventurers chased whispers across the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, even the cold grey waters of the North Sea. Each return, empty-handed, only deepened the longing. For there is a strange seduction in the unseen. Some have pointed to the ruins of Thanos or Aclaeon, a once mighty Egyptian port city lost 4 centuries beneath the silt of the Nile Delta, its statues now lying in green gloom among the fish. Others have stood on the volcanic cliffs of Santorini, where the island of Thera was blown apart in a blast that blackened skies and shattered a civilization. Its remains now a crescent embracing the sea. But neither name, neither place could silence the deeper calling of the myth, because Atlantis is not simply a place, it is an ache. Beneath the surface, the ocean moves with an eternal patience. It covers, it buries, it remakes. Currents brush over columns toppled by time, over roads smothered by coral, over amphorae that once held oil and wine for vanished hands. It is easy to believe that somewhere in those blue immensities, an entire city wets its gates encrusted with shells, its mosaics intact beneath drifting silt, its streets patrolled only by shadows and silver fish. Imagine it descending into a shaft of light that cuts the water, seeing the white stone of a courtyard emerge from the gloom. The sound is gone, replaced by the throb of your own breath and the low song of the sea. You pass under an arch, its carvings softened by centuries of salt. A statue leans toward you, face worn to anonymity. In the stillness, you feel not alone, but watched. The walls are silent, but they remember, and in that moment you understand why Atlantis has never been found. For what we are searching for is not merely stone and history, it is the perfect moment before the fall, the breath before the wave, the gleam of a world untouched by its own ruin. Plato said Atlantis lay beyond the pillars of Heracles in the vast waters that few dared to cross. Today, we look across those same waters, but our maps are more complete. We can trace the mountains hidden under the sea, the plains where light never reaches. Sonar sweeps reveal shapes that tease the eye lines that might be walls, shadows that might be streets. Yet, when the divers descend, they find only rock. Always rock. Still, the pulse persists. Some think the gods drowned Atlantis, not in anger, but in mercy, to preserve it as it was in its brightest hour, untouched by decay or compromise. Others believe it was a warning, a mirror held to every age that rises to high. Perhaps both are true. The sea is both a grave and a cradle. It can destroy, but it also keeps. What it holds without end. On certain nights, when the moon rides high and the wind is low, the ocean turns to glass. If you stand on the shore then, you can see far into the dark the faint gleam of wave ridges catching starlight. Some say that if you look long enough, you will see lights below her, flicker like lanterns swaying in the deep. A suggestion of movement in streets no longer bound to the air. But the vision never lasts. The next wave breaks, and the city is gone again, sliding back into dream. Perhaps that is why the tale survives when so many others fade. Atlantis lives in the space between certainty and wonder. To prove it real would be to still its heartbeat. To prove it false would be to kill a dream older than nations. And so it remains just beyond reach, as it has for 2,000 years. Island that is always sinking, always rising, but never touched. Somewhere, beneath leagues of salt water, the stones still stand. Or perhaps they never did. It does not matter. What matters is that we keep listening for that slow, deep pulse the one that tells us there is more to the world than what the daylight shows. For the sea is not empty, it remembers, and in its darkest depths, the city still breathes. The wind moves strangely along the outer banks. It does not blow as a single breath, but in sighs restless, circling sighs that carry the smell of salt and pine and something older. At night, it is joined by the creak of distant timbers, as if ghost ships are docking in a harbor that no longer exists. The sand shifts, the tides rise and retreat, and the sea keeps the stories it chooses, letting them surface only in fragments. One such fragment is carved into weathered wood, a single word, Croatoan. It is all that remains of an entire settlement, a whole gathering of souls who sailed from England in 1587 to make their lives on a wild and shifting shore. Over 100 men, women, and children. They stepped onto the soil of Roanoke Island with hope heavy as their trunks of possessions. Behind them lay the restless Atlantic, ahead of them the unmapped forests of a land both beautiful and indifferent. They built their houses of timber and thatch. They cleared the brambles from the soil and planted corn. Smoke rose in the evenings from their hearths, drifting into the blue summer sky. Some may have thought of England in those moments of narrow streets and chiming bells, of church pews and market stalls. Others, perhaps, thought only of survival, of the sharp edge between harvest and hunger. And then the governor, John White, set sail back to England for supplies. His ship cut across the Atlantic, leaving the settlers behind, trusting that the season would hold them. But fate twisted its knife. War with Spain held White in England far longer than he intended. By the time he returned, 3 long years later, the island's shoreline met him with only silence. The houses stood empty. No smoke rose from the chimneys. The tools lay untouched, the earth untended. There was no sign of battle note broken. Fences, no scattered bones, no graves, fresh or old. The settlement was simply gone. Only that single word remained, carved into the post of a palisade, Croatoan. The letters were deep, deliberate, without the mark of haste. White knew the word. Wellet was the name of a nearby island, home to the Croatan people. If the settlers had moved there, it would have been according to plan. They had agreed before his departure that such a sign would mark their trail. But no cross, the prearranged signal of danger, was carved beside it. He meant to sail there at once, but storms rose without warning, slamming against his vessel, driving it back. The sea, it seemed, had no intention of revealing the truth, and so the word remained the only trace. What happened between the day the colonists last saw John White's ship slip into the horizon and the day he returned to their absence? Theories unfurl like the tide and vanish just as quickly. Some whisper that they were taken by force by rival colonial powers, by hostile tribes, by shadows no one has ever named. Others believe they sought refuge among the Croatan people, merging their fates, leaving behind the ways of England for the deep-rooted traditions of the coast. Still others murmur of sickness, of hunger, of slow death beneath the trees, the survivors scattering into the wild like startled birds. Yet none of these stories leaves the mind as haunted as the truth of what was found. Nothing. No graveyard, no bodies, no cries heard over the dunes. Only an emptiness that was not empty at all, but filled with the weight of 100 untold endings. Imagine that last evening, whatever it was, the sun settling low over the pines, the shadows lengthening across the clearing, The colonists gathered mothers holding children, men with axes leaning against their shoulders, the governor's chair standing unused by the fire. A decision made in low voices. Perhaps they left in the night, torches casting fleeting light on the palisade. Or perhaps they carved the word under a high noon sky, the forest listening, the gulls wheeling above. And then, gone. The island has not given them back. Seasons have come and gone, storms have swept the sands from one side to another, but the ground refuses to speak. In 400 years, no shovel has struck the corner of a vanished house, no coin has been pulled from the soil with the salt still clinging to it. Those who walk the site today speak of a strange quiet. The wind sounds different there, muted, as if the air itself is holding its breath. At dusk, the light filters through the trees in long golden bars, falling on the grass where the houses once stood. If you stand still enough, the silence wraps around you until you begin to feel, not think, but feel that the absence itself is the presence, that the settlers have not left, but are woven into the air, the sand, the pines. The word on the palisade post is long gone now, worn away by centuries, but it remains in memory like a bell that tolls without a church. Croatoan, a name, a place, a question, a tombstone without a grave, and perhaps that is why Roanoke has never been solved, because to solve it would strip it of the very thing that makes it endure. It is not just the story of a vanished colony. It is the story of a breath held for centuries, of a question with no answer, of a shoreline that will never tell all it has seen. At night, when the tide withdraws and the stars glitter over the dark water, you can almost imagine the shapes of small houses along the tree line, smoke rising from chimneys, a lantern swinging gently from a post. The air smells of salt and pine, and if the wind shifts just so, you might think you hear footsteps in the sand behind you, measured, unhurried, leaving no prints. But when you turn, there is nothing, only the sound of the sea and the sigh of the wind, and the certainty that the emptiness here is not absence at all, but the echo of something that will not fade. The colony is gone. The word remains, and the island keeps its secret, waiting for no one. Beneath the hills of Tuscany, in chambers cut from the living rock, the Etruscans still sleep. Their painted walls show banquets frozen in an eternal duskman reclining on couches, women draped in fine cloth, musicians holding lyres mid-song. The colors have dulled but not died. The smiles have not faded. The air is heavy with the scent of stone and earth, the slow breathing of centuries. Down here, it is as if time itself has forgotten to move. But above, the world has changed. The roads that once led to Etruscan cities now bear Roman names. The language that once rose from their marketplaces is gone from human mouths. Even their gods, once fierce and strange, now wear the faces of Roman divinities. The people did not vanish in the fire of conquest. They were unmade, more quietly, more slowly, absorbed until they were no longer themselves. Long before Rome's first walls rose from the Palatine Hill, the Etruscans ruled this land. They built cities crowned with temples, streets paved in careful lines, harbors that welcomed ships from across the Mediterranean. Their artisans shaped bronze into figures that seemed to breathe, carved stone into warriors and lovers, and painted the walls of tombs with the colors of life. Their language curled in elegant letters on clay and bronze, beautiful as any Roman script, yet it remains half unknown to us, a song with half its notes lost. The Romans knew them well. They traded with them, learned from them. Rome's first Kings, it is said, wore Etruscan crowns. The Romans took their auguries, the reading of bird flight, the mapping of lightning in the sky from Etruscan priests, the curve of the Roman arch, the sweep of the gladiator's chariot, even the purple stripe worn by Roman senators. These were gifts from the Etruscans. And yet, in time, Rome grew stronger, strong enough to push against the boundaries of Etruscan power, strong enough to take their cities one by one. But this was not the sack and ruin of barbarians. This was the slow tide of an empire rising, flowing into every space it touched. Etruscan cities became Roman colonies. Etruscan sons served in the Roman army. Their merchants spoke Latin in the markets. Their laws bent to Roman law. Their gods folded into the Roman pantheon until their names were little more than shadows. It happened so slowly that no one could name the moment it began. The moment it began. No single battle broke them. No single treaty ended them. Instead, they slipped into the empire like dye into water, their colors fading until the water ran clear. But underground, they remembered themselves. The tombs tell us so, carved into the tufa decorated with images of dancers, hunters, feasts, and journeys to the afterlife. They speak of a people who believed that death was not an ending, but a passage. They buried their dead with mirrors, jewelry, and weapons, as if the soul would need such things beyond the grave. They built stone sarcophagi with lids carved into the shapes of the dead, reclining as if on a couch, faces calm and untroubled in these tombs. The Etruscan voice has not yet been silenced. In their curling, undeciphered script, messages to the gods still whisper from pottery shards and funeral offerings. The Romans did not burn these chambers. They covered them. The earth swallowed them whole, and with them, the last words the Etruscans ever spoke in their own tongue. Even now, archaeologists kneel before these relics, tracing the shapes of letters that cannot be read, brushing away the centuries with careful hands. Each inscription is a door locked from within. We have the keys for none. Somewhere in that half-light between memory and forgetting lies the tragedy of the Etruscans. They were not erased in blood and smoke. They were not reduced to ash by a single cruel day. Instead, their identity was worn away as a statue is worn by the wind. First the edges soften, then the lines blur until the face itself disappears. They were conquered not by the sword, but by the tongue, the law, the custom, the march of Rome's vast, unyielding embrace. Imagine the last generation who truly thought in Etruscan, who prayed to their gods in words their children no longer understood. Perhaps they felt the change in their bones. Perhaps they feared it. Perhaps they thought, foolishly or hopefully, that their way of life would bend but not break. And then they were gone, and with them the music of their language, the taste of their bread, the sound of their laughter in the streets. Today their cities lie beneath vineyards and olive groves. The outlines of their walls are faint in the hills, the stones scattered, worn smooth by centuries of rain. The roads they built have been walked for so long that no one remembers who first laid them. Rome took their land, their names, their gods, and even their dead, binding them into a story that no longer bore their own telling. But in the silence of their tombs, the Etruscans endure. Here the paint still clings to the stone. The dancers still raise their arms in frozen rhythm. The banqueters still recline, lifting their cups to a feast that will never end. Here, in the cool darkness, their forgotten tongue still curls in graceful lines. Each letter a defiance against oblivion. If you walk among these chambers alone, the air seems to listen to you. Every step echoes against the stone, and the shadows feel heavy, as though someone stands just beyond the edge of the torchlight. The Etruscans are not gone, they are waiting, patient, for their words to be read again, for their names to be spoken. And perhaps that is the truest form of disappearance, not to vanish completely, but to remain unseen, unheard, your face hidden behind the mask of another people, to live on in their customs, their buildings, their language, while your own slips silently into the dark dot in time. Even Rome would fall. Its temples would crumble, its language change, its name fade from living speech. But the Etruscans had already learned what it meant to be swallowed by history. They had already been ghosts walking in their own streets, and so, in the stillness of their underground cities, the Etruscans dream on. They dream in a language we cannot understand. They dream of sunlight on terracotta roofs, of ships pulling into their harbors, of children running through the markets. They dream of a world that no longer remembers their name, but still walks their roads, still drinks from their wells, still kneels before their gods thinking them Roman. The stone lids of their sarcophagi are cold to the touch. The carved faces are calm, unblinking, and if you listen long enough, in the deep quiet where the earth holds its breath, you might think you hear them whispering, not in Latin, not in the tongue of empire, but in their own words, the ones we cannot read. It is the sound of a people who are gone and yet still here. The sound of Rome's disappearing dynasty,